Welcome, everyone. I want to thank those of you that are watching at home and all of our panelists who are joining us today for this important conversation. I am Sheila E. Esong. I am the Engagement Director at Giffords, and I have the honor of sharing the virtual stage today with Ryan Busse, former Congresswoman Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, and John Gold. And we're all here to discuss what passing universal background checks in the Senate means to gun owners. We at Giffords launched Giffords Gun Owners for Safety late last year, and we are really excited about organizing common sense gun owners. So excited to be here today with all of you. Thank you for your attention, and we really hope that you enjoy the conversation that we have today. Before we get into that conversation, though, I would love to share a little more about our panelists. I'm going to start with Ryan Busse. Like I mentioned, Ryan is a former firearms executive who's helped build one of the world's most iconic gun companies. And he was nominated multiple times by industry colleagues for the prestigious Shooting Industry Person of the Year award. We'll have to ask Ryan to tell us a little bit more about how he won that award. But Ryan is an environmental advocate who has served in many leadership roles for conservation organizations, including as an advisor for the United States Senate Sportsman Caucus and the Biden presidential campaign. He remains a proud outdoorsman, gun owner, father, and resident of the great state of Montana. So Ryan, thank you for being here today. I would just love it if you could just share a little bit more about your personal and professional journey and experiences and what led you to Giffords.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sheila. Happy to be here with everybody. And Sheila's right. I have quite a history with guns. I grew up on a ranch. I started shooting with my dad and my brother when I was a young boy. I still shoot today with my own boys, just about every chance we get. And the truth is that a lot of the best times in my life have been around with and around guns. And for a while, I thought that I had got a dream job in the firearms industry. And the industry insisted on the same sort of lessons, responsibility and safety that my dad taught me as a kid and that I teach my own boys now. Things changed throughout my career, as evidenced not very long ago. The firearms industry would not even allow tactical guns to be displayed in the major trade shows. Obviously, those things dominate the trade shows now, so I have witnessed quite a bit of change. I also saw the NRA begin to use guns as a symbol, a powerful radicalization symbol for our politics in our country. And yes, there were increased gun sales as a byproduct of that, but it really, I came to realize that it really wasn't about gun sales so much as it was about increasing partisan power. And anything could be sacrificed for that partisan power. Throughout my career, I saw, not very long ago, most guns were bought for self-defense and for target shooting, for hunting, for competition. I know I sold millions of those guns for those reasons. There's still a lot of us that buy those guns and use them for those reasons. But to the NRA, I came to learn that those things are boring. They don't gin up the sort of fear and hate that really kind of fuel the national division and need for money that the organization needed. So over time and during my years in the industry, I saw that the NRA would sacrifice things, like my wholesome childhood, safety, reason, decency, responsibility, and they replaced them with conspiracy theories and fear, and those things are useful to create political power. And they create a world where people believe they need to buy guns and use them against their fellow citizens. And frankly, that's very frightening to me. And it creates a world where responsible regulation doesn't happen. And that leads to a lot of bad things, including accidents and murders and mass shootings. And it's a vicious cycle. And a lot of innocent people have been sacrificed because of that power greed, that greed for power from the NRA. I saw this coming. I tried to fight against it from the inside. I did fight against it. I've written a book about all that. It's coming out in the fall. And I think the NRA they've driven our country to the edge of civil war. And we're on a call about gun policy, but every single policy in our country has been made worse because of the political radicalization that the NRA has wrought on our country. The worst actors in Congress, I don't think our lives are better because of these people: Ted Cruz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Mo Brooks, Matt Gaetz. They all have a singular one single thing in common. Everyone was supported or endorsed by the NRA, and I don't think that's by accident. And so for me, at least, it's clear that the NRA has sacrificed our national decency and safety, and I'm fearful that they're willing to sacrifice our democracy too, just for more partisan power. So I'm here today for the millions of gun owners like me, and I want to say that the NRA does not speak for us. And I have a deep respect for Gabby, for the organization, and I think that what this organization is doing is as important as anything there is in this country, because I don't think that we're going to heal as a country until we can help improve this gun situation. So very happy to be here. I want to say that the NRA doesn't speak for us gun owners, and thanks for the introduction, Sheila.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ryan. I mean, I think that that's so timely, right? Thank you for sharing your lived experience, your personal experience, and your professional experience. I think that's a perfect transition and segue into our next panelist. And you talked a little bit about, elected officials and how important they are, in this fight, right, to prevent gun violence. So, we need strong voices to stand up to the NRA, and nobody knows this better than former Congresswoman Debbie Mucarsel-Powell. Debbie was elected to Florida's 24th congressional district in 2018. And in Congress, she focused on foreign affairs, education, healthcare policy, environmental sustainability, and of course, gun violence prevention, which is what brought her here today. She sat on the Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security, and she served as the vice chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, where she led efforts to pass the first gun safety legislation in 24 years. So I'm really excited to introduce all of you to Debbie. Debbie, could you share with us just a little bit more about your personal and professional experiences and what led you here today to be working with Giffords?
Yeah, good afternoon, Sheila. Thank you so much for holding this conversation, this such a critical conversation at the moment that we're facing, an epidemic of gun violence that's affecting millions of Americans across the country. Like you said, I was elected in 2018 to Florida's 26th district. And one of the reasons why I decided to run back in 2017 for Congress is because of the high rates of gun violence that we were facing here in the state of Florida, particularly in Florida's 26th district, for kids, especially for kids under the age of 18. And this is such a personal issue for me because I lost my father when I was 24 years old. And I remember receiving a phone call. I was in a class getting my master's degree, and I was pulled out of the classroom to get the phone call from my sister to tell me that my father had been shot and killed by a criminal with a gun. My life changed forever. It's been years that I've been working on this issue. I've met many parents who have lost their children to senseless acts of gun violence here in Florida and across America. And so I decided to run, and it was one of the issues that I ran on. And I can tell you that thanks to the advocacy of thousands of parents and young students and people who were marching on the streets asking for change, I was able to get elected. And I sat on the Judiciary Committee so that I can work specifically on gun violence issues. And for the first time in 24 years, you're right, we were able to pass the universal background check bill. I remember meeting Gabby when I was in Congress, and her team really working tirelessly to make sure that they provided the resources, the information on ensuring that we could pass this bill in the House of Representatives. And it took 11 hours. The committee room was full of family members who had lost loved ones to gun violence, and the Republicans, my colleagues on the other side, were putting every effort and every block and trick in the book to ensure that we didn't get it through committee, but we did, and we passed it in the House of Representatives. Unfortunately, Mitch McConnell didn't do a thing. He let that bill sit in his desk without bringing it to a vote on the floor. And here we are again. We have a new Congress who, on a bipartisan basis, was able to once again pass H.R. 8, the Universal Background Check bill, that more than 89% of Americans are united in the support of this piece of legislation. That includes Republicans, Democrats, independents, gun owners, and people that represent the gun industry, people like Ryan friends and families who know that we can't accept inaction from our government officials when we continue to see mass shootings across America, violence in our communities, children that are losing their lives. It's happening in churches, it's happening in theaters, it's happening in Walmarts, like what we saw in El Paso, in workplaces, like the one that we just saw in California, and it has to stop. And so I am so honored to be able to join Gabby in her fight. She's been leading this fight for 10 years. Gabby was also a member of Congress, and it's a personal issue for her as well. And so it is my honor to be able to have this opportunity to work with the Giffords team alongside Gabby to ensure that we do everything in our power to prevent one more shooting from happening in this country. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I think, you explained, I think, so eloquently why we're all important in this fight, right? We all have a role to play, whether you are a gun owner, right, who's a parent, whether you are an actual staff member of a GVP organization like myself, or whether you're an elected official, right, who has a responsibility to their constituents to keep them safe. And so thank you for sharing your background there. And, I can't wait for, the viewers to hear more about what you have to say. At this point in time, I have the, distinct honor and privilege of, introducing all of you to our fearless leader, the former Congresswoman, Gabrielle Giffords. We're so excited that she was able to be here with all of you today. And I'm just going to kind of pass that along to Gabby. Gabby, what have you been up to?
I'm so busy. A lot of Zoom calls. Work. Yoga twice a week, French horn, Spanish lessons, riding my bike, walking on my treadmill, watching movies. It's Groundhog Day all over again.
That's amazing. That's amazing to hear how you're doing, Gabby. I could probably talk all day and take the entire hour, explaining to everyone here how you inspire me and you inspire, my colleagues and I think the greater gun violence prevention movement. But I'm going to pass the mic to you to kind of share some words of hope for everyone that's out here watching and listening.
I know in the darkest of days of pain and uncertain recovery. But confronted by despair, I've summoned hope. Confronted by paralysis and aphasia, I responded with grit and determination. I put one foot in from the other. I found one word, and then I found another. My recovery is a daily fight, but fighting makes me stronger. Words once came easily. Today I struggle to speak, but I've not lost my voice. America needs all us to speak out, even when you have to fight to find the words. I'm also in a second fight, the fight to stop gun violence. It's also a fight forged by tragedy and pain, a fight that can change lives. We are at a crossroads. We can let the shooting continue, or we can act. We can protect our families, our future. We can vote. We can be on the right side of history. Please join us in this fight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabby, for inspiring us with your words. I think right now, in the midst still of a global pandemic, we could all use, a little bit more courage, I think, to stand up to the NRA and to pass universal background checks, and background checks are a common sense policy, right? This is a policy that's supported by a majority of Republicans and Democrats, regardless of what the NRA would like people to believe. And I think that brings me to our next panelist, John Gold. John has 24 years of experience as a gun safety instructor. He has testified before the Michigan State Legislature and written op-eds about his experience. He tragically and unfortunately lost 3 close friends to firearm suicide in the last 3 years. And you know, I can't wait for you all to hear about John's expertise and his experience. And so, you know, at this time, I'd love to bring Debbie, John, and Ryan together for us to have a collective discussion on everyone's experiences with gun ownership and their fight in the movement to reduce gun violence. So welcome, panelists. Thank you again for being here. Can't wait to kind of jump into this conversation. So I'm gonna start with John, right? We've heard a little bit from Ryan, we've heard a little bit from Debbie. So I'm gonna start with John here. You know, John, there's been so much in the news lately surrounding the NRA, right? Whether it's lawsuits or litigation, you know, relocation from New York to Texas to back to New York, or just general discord and turmoil within leadership. Can you walk us through what the NRA used to be and how they've changed since they supported background checks after the Columbine shooting?
Yeah, thanks, Sheila. Thanks for having me here. It's been a long way since the NRA I joined was the NRA. We used to be about, or at least we were told we were about self-defense. We were told we were about being safe when we were hunting. We were told that we were about protecting our loved ones and the others around us. And it was a quiet code that we had. We weren't loud about it. We certainly weren't carrying out in the open. We weren't carrying firearms to walk into congressional sessions, the capitals of our state. But I would say that you're right, that Columbine was probably where it all turned. When Wayne LaPierre testified before the House Judiciary Committee on crime and said that mandatory background checks at gun shows especially was something that was reasonable. In fact, the quote goes, "We think it's reasonable to provide mandatory instant criminal background checks for every sale at every gun show, no loopholes anywhere for anyone." We heard that out of his mouth, and then we saw a complete double back. We saw a complete reversal, and we saw an evolution, and I'm going to echo Ryan here, we saw an evolution away from safety and protection and a big evolution towards selling more guns.
Thank you so much, John, for walking us through that. And you know, what I failed to mention earlier is that, you know, John is a member of Giffords Gun Owners for Safety. He's the president of our Michigan chapter and has been doing some really, really great work over the last year or so, you know, with our folks on the ground and also just with the Giffords team. So thank you, John. We really appreciate that great work. And hopefully, you know, we'll get some good legislation passed in Michigan, but also, you know, federally as well. I'm going to transition over to Ryan, right, and kind of continue on the conversation that John started, right? So we all know that, you know, from what John discussed, that, you know, the NRA are kind of in this for themselves, right? You know, they're not really speaking for the average gun owner. We know that they're focused on profits in the gun industry. So could you kind of speak to that and speak to, you know, the how and the why of why, you know, the NRA no longer represents you and sportsmen and sportswomen alike throughout the country?
Yeah, you know, a bit about my personal story. I think that those of us who are thoughtful about this understand that a political partisan behemoth like the NRA really doesn't have principles except for partisan power. And that means that eventually anything that is good and wholesome in its way, it will gobble up. And for me, at least, as a hunter and as an environmental, as a concerned environmentalist and a conservationist, hunters and conservationists have been gobbled up by the NRA. They've been co-opted because they need the cover fire, so to speak, from the sort of social acceptance that hunters and conservationists give the NRA, but they do nothing. In fact, they're quite contradictory in their policies and their political positions to any well-being, to any good policy and well-being for hunters and fishermen, for outdoorsmen. And so I saw through, you know, again, it's in my book, but personal stories about how the NRA would, you know, co-opt us and then sacrifice us. And I think that's true of just about every class of people and concerned class in the nation, that, you know, if you're in their way, they will gob you up for more power. And I think the NRA supports, represents themselves and a few powerful politicians, but that's it. Nobody else, not concerned gun owners. That's just a path to more power.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ryan. I'm going to pass the baton over to Debbie here now. We've talked a little bit about, the NRA. We've talked a little bit about, historically how they got here in terms of their position, right, on universal background checks. And now I want to talk a little bit about, actually passing those laws. And one of the clear-cut ways for us to combat the NRA and the culture that they represent is, of course, by passing state laws, but also passing federal laws that prioritize saving lives from gun violence. So, Debbie, could you discuss how the federal legislation is needed, keeping in mind that, of course, gun owners can always cross state lines to purchase a gun without a background check in maybe a nearby state?
Yeah, Sheila, so one of the problems that we have in this country, because people don't realize that, yes, we do have laws in place that could protect us from violence, but unfortunately, many of these laws have loopholes. And one of the biggest loopholes that we have currently is these gun shows that we see all over America. We have two of the largest gun shows here in South Florida, in the area where I live in. And so you see unlicensed dealers that are selling guns without conducting background checks. Also, you can purchase weapons online or buy pieces of weapons that actually create these ghost guns that a lot of people are talking about now, and it's definitely a concern for law enforcement. And so it is the responsibility of our officials to look at these laws, especially now that we're going through such a crisis as we went through the pandemic and things started opening back up. We've seen more than 240 mass shootings this year alone. The rate of violence is higher than what we saw back in 2019 before the pandemic. And so there are ways that we can actually protect our communities from violence and the deaths that these gun violence episodes are causing. And so HR 8 is the universal background check bill that would actually address closing these loopholes. So it would require these dealers that are selling guns at gun shows to ensure that they're conducting background checks. We passed this law, like we mentioned earlier, through the Judiciary Committee when I was in the House of Representatives back in 2019. And we saw that the House of Representatives, once again this year, in the past few months, took that bill once again, and they passed it in a bipartisan basis. It got significant Republican support in the House of Representatives. And so now what we're asking is that the Senate take this bill on. Americans cannot continue to live through the violence that we're experiencing. Americans from all walks of life, in every state, in blue states, in red states, they are all united in this issue. This is a unifying issue. It should not be political. The Senate has the opportunity to show Americans that we can pass a bipartisan piece of legislation that has the support of the majority of Americans, close to 90% of Americans. And of course, one piece of legislation, Sheila, is not going to prevent every single act of violence, but it will significantly reduce the means in which people that want to do harm, people that have violent backgrounds, make it much more difficult for them to be able to purchase these weapons. And that's why I think that we need to act at the federal level, because as you know, Sheila, we have states that have different gun laws. California has some of the strictest gun laws, but then someone from Texas can drive in, purchase a weapon without having a license, without conducting a background check, and drive into California and use that weapon to kill people. So that's why it's so important to take this issue at the federal level that will make sure that we don't let these guns land in the wrong hands.
Thank you for walking us through that, Debbie. I think that was really, really helpful. And hopefully the audience, understand now, the piece, that we're in, the moment that we're in time right now. We have an opportunity. The Senate has an opportunity. Senators have an opportunity to stand up for survivors and for, Americans, everyday Americans, right, who are struggling with so many different things. And on top of that, gun violence. It almost behooves me as to why, a senator would, not take this opportunity to vote in support of background checks. So thank you for that. I think that was, a great transition into a video that I would love to share with everyone about Giffords Gun Owners for Safety and everyday gun owners that are fighting for background checks.
I believe in the Second Amendment, and I believe in sensible gun laws.
This entire experience of getting to own a gun is incredible, but it only will be allowed if we can do it safely.
Seeing our Americans being shot on the streets, in our house of worship, or in our schools, that's unacceptable.
Students in this country should not have to go to school afraid for their lives, but we need sensible gun laws in order to make that happen.
It's time for there to be a change.
Advocating for gun safety is just part of being a responsible gun owner. It's just being a responsible human.
I'm a responsible gun owner.
And that's why I'm committed to gun safety.
Hey, everyone. So, we've heard from our really distinguished panelists. They've walked us through a number of different things. And I mentioned earlier that John Gold was a former firearm instructor. So one of the things that we've asked John to do today is to kind of walk everyone through what the actual process is like when you are buying a gun and going through a background check. I spend a lot of my time, my team, they spend a lot of their times talking to gun owners, trying to get people to engage, right? Folks that, may politically align with our organization. And one of the things that people ask for folks that have never gone through a background check is, what is that process actually like? Is this going to be something that is complicated? Is it going to be something that's going to delay me or prevent me from purchasing a firearm that I may need in a short amount of time? So, we thought it would be a great idea to ask John to kind of explain what that process is like for folks who may not know. John?
So, you want to buy a gun. This is what happens when you go to a gun store that's licensed by the ATF. You're going to be asked for ID to prove your age and state residency. You complete Form 4473, which is used by the FBI, and I'll explain what an NICS check is in just a second, but it's very important to remember that those forms are kept with the dealer. They never make it to the federal government, and they never become a registry. 90% of all people getting checked by the system get a response in 2 minutes. So the notion that this is a huge inconvenience really isn't. It's less intrusive than filling out the forms you fill out before you go to a doctor's appointment. Last year, 300,000 requests were denied. So 300,000 instances where people weren't supposed to get firearms, the system worked and it kept them from getting them. In my situation, the system only applies to handguns because you can buy long guns without an NICS check at all. The key thing to remember here is there is no federal firearm registry. The FBI takes extensive measures to ensure the security of this information, and it's destroyed. It is not a created federal registry. Could we go to the next slide, please? So the problem is that there are loopholes. In the, Debbie talked about them earlier. Private sales are not regulated or licensed by the ATF. That means I could sell a gun to a friend. I could inherit a weapon from a relative. I could go to a gun show and talk to one of those private dealers. Although it's important to remember that if they are a federally licensed dealer at a gun show, they do have to run those background checks. But any private individual who shows up to sell those guns can do so. You can meet a private seller on the internet. And while you can't ship the gun in between places, probably without getting caught, you can certainly meet them somewhere and have that transaction. And finally, I got this example from someone the other day. There was literally somebody selling guns out of the trunk of his car at a McDonald's. There's no NICS background checks or records required under current federal law for private sales or transfers, and we really need to make that change.
Thank you so much, John, for walking us through that. I think that, that was a great exercise, and it seems like it's a very, very, very simple process for those that are out there that, may have thought that it was a big burden, and I do believe that it's the least that we can do, if we're going to be promoting the purchasing of firearms. So thank you for that. We're going to get back into some questions with the rest of the panel at this point in time, and we're running pretty well on time. So I did want to kind of take some questions from the audience and get folks a little bit involved. John, you talked a little bit about that process of going through getting a background check and who it affects and what kind of guns it affects. So I kind of wanted to ask Ryan a question related to that. Ryan, if universal background checks are passed, would an individual still be able to transfer guns to a family member or a friend?
So that's a good question, and that's something I'm sure John, that's a concern that I'm sure John hears a lot. It's something I hear a lot. If my dad wants to give me a shotgun that we both hunted with, would that be legal, or how would that happen after if universal background checks were passed? And actually, there's a very specific carve out for that exactly, so that responsible as long as it is under the understanding of everybody in the transaction that there is no criminal activity. There's a carve out in the law that allows two things. First, families to loan firearms to other family members, like say, for instance, if we wanted to go pheasant hunting for the afternoon or something and you wanted to borrow my shotgun, we could do that. If my father wanted to transfer me a shotgun. So there are carve outs for that. The sort of hyperbolic reaction that we often hear that it would outlaw or prohibit, a dad or a mother or somebody giving their child a firearm, an heirloom. That's just untrue. There are specific carve outs for that. And I will say this, even if there were background checks that were required, or if some people request or desire background checks, which often happens, as John said, it's not a hard thing to do. You go to a gun store, they check the gun into their books, you go through a 5-minute background check process, you take the gun back out of the books, it's now transferred ownership. Getting your driver's license is a lot harder than that.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm gonna ask a question to Debbie now. A question about a question that we've received from individuals who may be from states where their senators already support universal background checks. What are some other ways that they can push for background checks to be passed if they're from a state where their senator is already in support?
Well, let me encourage you, even if you know that your senators support HRA, the Universal Background Check Bill, I think it's still important for you to call them and tell them that you support the bill, because that helps your senators bring those numbers of people that they're receiving those calls from to leadership so that they can bring that bill to the floor. So it really does help. I would love for everyone watching us today and for you to spread the word, to join the movement and to become active, to help us spread the word by going to giffords.org, giffords.org. There are many ways there on the website that you'll find that you'll be able to help us and help us spread the word to your family, to your friends, people that that may be living in states where senators are not in support of HR8. Let me give you just some information coming from someone who resides here in the state of Florida. We have 2 senators who are opposing currently HR8. It's Senator Marco Rubio, Senator Rick Scott. And I can assure you that in Florida, Senator Marco Rubio will be facing an election in 2022. And overwhelmingly, Floridians support a candidate that will vote in favor of HR8, the Universal Background Check Bill. So there's also a political consequence here for some of these senators across the country. If they don't take action, if they continue to listen to the gun lobby and be influenced by the millions of dollars that they receive in campaign contributions, there will be political consequences. So I think it's important for you to share that information with your family, with your friends. And we're finding those numbers overwhelmingly in many of the states across America, in Ohio, in Texas. The majority, more than 50% of Ohioans support H.R. 8, the Universal Background Check bill, and they will not vote for a candidate that does not vote in favor of H.R. 8. So this is going to bring some political consequences. And I think, like I said, I was elected by the help of thousands of families here in the state of Florida that had had enough, and they wanted someone that was going to take action. I think we're going to see the same in 2022, especially with the high number of shootings that we've seen this year alone in the United States.
Thank you for that. I think that's, amazing advice for, individuals that are looking for ways to take action and to get involved with this. I would also, urge folks to think about their networks, right? Think about the individuals that family, friends, colleagues, people that you've worked with that live in states that may not have senators that are supporting this. We call it relational organizing in the engagement team. And all that means, that's just a fancy way of saying talking to the people that you go to church with, or you go to the synagogue with, or that you go hunting with, or shooting with, or that you go to, PTA meetings with, and talking to them about, issues like this that affect their lives, right? Because no matter who you are and where you live, whatever state you live in, right? We've got, someone from Michigan on the panel, we've got someone from Florida, and we've got someone from Montana, and I'm from the great state of Maryland. And it doesn't really matter. We all want to be safe when we walk into the grocery store. We all want to be safe when we go, pick up our kids. We all want to be safe when we walk down the street. And so, I think that this is an issue that really cuts through, geography, race, class, gender, sexual orientation, identity, et cetera, religion, et cetera. And so, thank you all for all of that. We are going to wrap up the Q&A section right now and transition over to Shannon Flores. I would love to introduce Shannon to all of you, and then ask her to speak about some of the great work that she's been doing in the great state of Texas. Shannon is an organizer for us and with Giffords Gun Owners for Safety. She's a Texan and a former public school teacher. She's also married to an avid gun collector and a gun owner herself, and they have 3 children who shoot and hunt at the family's ranch. Her last year in the classroom was the year of the Santa Fe shooting, school shooting, and that year she shared with all of us that her twins entered kindergarten and unfortunately had to endure their first of many lockdown drills. And so, I'm going to pass this along to Shannon. Shannon, please provide any context or background that you want to share about yourself and also the great work that you've been doing with Giffords Gun Owners for Safety.
Thank you, Sheila, and hello to everyone. So we are very excited. We've been organizing Gun Owners for Safety members across the country, and we have an active Texas chapter. We have numerous coalitions in other states, and all these gun owners are raising their voice. Of course, organizing in the pandemic has been hard, and we had to be very creative, but all through 2020, we were actively engaging members and the public during the pandemic. We hosted educational webinars on various topics. One very close to my heart was Safe Kids, Safe Homes, where we talked about safe storage and how it protects kids. We've organized political outreach with lawmakers, hosted virtual town halls. Our members submitted written testimony to lawmakers in Colorado. John spoke to his lawmakers in Michigan and in Texas. We also had members go to our nation's capital. We participated in virtual lobby days here in Texas, and we were urging them to pass universal background checks. And that was specifically to honor those that we lost in the Midland, Odessa shooting. We are coming up now on the 2-year anniversary in August of that shooting. And we use that shooting specifically because the gun was purchased in a private sale. John mentioned it earlier. It had no background check. He should never have had a gun in the first place. He actually failed a background check in 2014. And so Americans across the spectrum politically want a background check on every gun sale every time. And we are urging the Senate to take action on H.R. 8, because as Debbie mentioned earlier, one state can have strong gun laws and then the next state over the border has lax laws. We want you to join us in this fight to reduce gun violence. Text universal to 34131. Again, that's universal to 34131. If you're a gun owner, we would love to have you. Please get involved with us. We have established chapters or work with us to start a new chapter. Please email us at gunowners@giffords.org. That's gunowners@giffords.org. We are very excited about this work and thank you for your support.